Once again, welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Hey, we're happy to welcome a familiar voice back to the program. His name is Oscar Gill-Lewis. Oscar, how are you today?
Hi, Brian. It's a pleasure to be here.
For those meeting you for the first time, take a moment to give us a little bit of background on who you are.
Of course, I'm a Young Voices contributor based in the UK, and I'm also an editor for Speak Freely magazine.
Well, I'm looking at an article that was just published about a week ago or a little more about what's happening in Great Britain. And I'll admit there's been a lot of my attention focused on the American election. But for the sake of those who weren't aware, there was also elections going on in other places, for instance, in Great Britain. Talk to me about how the election went, and then we can talk about how, even though it sounds like there was a shift in power, some of the nanny state policies still are persisting.
Sure, Brian. Well, I don't blame you for caring about the US election. It seems from my perspective that in the UK we spend more time on the US election than our own election, not to my displeasure. But so recently we had a general election where the Labour Party took over from the Conservative Party, which was in power for 14 years, and the Labour Party won with quite a large majority. But you are correct that they are keeping some of the nanny state policies that were introduced or proposed by Rishi Sunak, but obviously not just Rishi Sunak. So these policies have a long history and unfortunately a bipartisan history between the Labour Party, which is a centre-left party, and the Conservative Party or the Tories, which is a broadly centre-right party. And the policy is a mix of policies about smoking, so anti-smoking. So one of them is a generational smoking ban. So what would that mean? That would mean anyone born after 2008, 2009 wouldn't be able to buy cigarettes. So if you're born in 2007, you can buy cigarettes, but your friend who's born in 2008, no.
Well, they're sentencing me to a long life.
Exactly.
I seems like you and I had talked last time we spoke on this program about some of those nanny state policies, and I thought you made a very strong case for it. Look, it may be well intentioned, but there are unintended consequences that come along with this. I'm curious if the public voted, the Conservative Party out of power, why do these policies remain? Are they popular with the public, or does Labor have another agenda at hand?
I don't think they're popular with the public is a strange one, because you can always find a poll that supports your point of view. But I have to say that you can always find a poll that supports your point of view. But using public health as a reason, as your logic, as your motive for wanting to quote unquote protect people is always a powerful one, especially when we have very strong deification and lionisation of the NHS in the UK, obviously in the UK, but that has been generally supported by the Conservative Party and the Labour Party, and we saw that heavily in COVID-19.
No, I think actually what you're describing, I seem to see that play out pretty much everywhere. There are a lot of policies that can be brought. Well, this is a matter of public health, and that's supposed to get people to, okay, then I'll back off and fall in line, and we can proceed with it.
It's exactly what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic. Oh, you want to go outside? Oh, so you want to kill grandma? It's a very quick way to shut people down. I just want to have a cigarette. Oh, you want to give my child cancer? It's very bombastic reasoning, and I try to argue my piece that it's not based in fact as much as people might think that it is, rather intuition.
One thing I really appreciate in your article is you come right out and you call it what it is, which is a kind of soft authoritarianism. And I can understand, human nature, people want things that are safe and predictable, but if the trade-off is you don't really get to make a lot of decisions in your life, at some point it doesn't feel so soft anymore.
Exactly. And so it's not just your own decisions about whether you want to buy when you're 64 and your friend is 63 and they can't buy a cigarette, but you can. It's not just the person. It's not just those silly, ridiculous choices like that, or whether you want to smoke outside of a hospital or outside of in a park or near a children's play area. Those are some of the other proposals for bans on smoking, where you can't smoke in those areas. But there are also ideas that proposals that you won't be able to smoke in pub gardens. And so it's not just your consumer every day. We're making a choice. I want to buy cigarettes. Oh, the government won't let me because I was born in 2008. It also has huge economic impacts on businesses, especially the hospitality industry. And pub gardens in the UK, I'm not sure if it's popular in the US, but are a huge driver of business, especially for pubs.
So I have to ask, I'm
yes.
just curious, as far as the enforcement of this. So if someone, I love the example you gave. I'm 63, but my friend who's 64 can legally buy cigarettes, but I can't. If you were to provide smoking materials to someone who falls on the wrong side of that ban, is that a prosecutable offense?
My understanding is that would be illegal. It would be interesting to see whether the UK government would actually prosecute anybody for that. I think they made the proposal without really thinking that one through, but at this rate, I wouldn't be surprised if that happened, which is unfortunate to say.
So walk me through, if you would. I know that there are some very serious things that have been undertaken to try to curb smoking, or at least discourage smoking. How does that start out? I mean, how did the government's efforts to persuade people not to smoke begin, and now has led up to where someone's talking about, well, if you're born after this date, you can't buy?
Well, I think a lot of the reaction to sort of ban smoking comes from the embarrassment of sort of decades of research where we said smoking's good for you, it's great, and then more research comes out, leads to cancer and all these bad effects. So I think there's a certain reaction where people said it was good, and then they found out that it was not great. So there's a certain attempt to solve that and redress that. My understanding is that it starts out small, which is what most soft authoritarians do. Packaging, where you put the mal effects of it, and then of smoking, and then you put horrible pictures on, and then you put in big capitals, "This kills." You ban adverts, and then you hide cigarettes behind a wall so you can't see them, and it goes on and on and on until we're banning people born after a certain year from buying cigarettes. So it leads up very slowly, but it does build up, and that's what it's hard to see, but it does happen.
Well, and as you point out in your article, it rarely stops with cigarettes. I mean, if we can do that to discourage smoking, what are other unhealthy habits that likewise could be approached in a similar fashion? I mean, there are foods I really like, but boy, if they wanted to stop me from eating them, would somebody be willing to pass a law saying, well, sorry, you can't buy that hamburger?
Exactly. Especially with McDonald's and Five Guys and all these delicious foods that these brands are making. It's what's next. The simplest pleasures, you can always make a case against them for the cause of public health.
So we've got about 30 seconds here, but Oscar, is there anyone making the case for personal freedoms?
Absolutely. So there are two key people that I would point to. One is the economist Christopher Snowdon at the Institute of Economic Affairs, and also Simon Clarke, a lobbyist for the organization Forest, Freedom Organization for the Right to Enjoy Smoking Tobacco.
That's probably one of the best acronyms I've heard yet. Love it. Again, we're talking with Oscar Gill-Lewis. Thanks again for bringing some light to this subject. If people wish to follow your work, where can they find you? Where can they find you also on social media?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Oscar Gill-Lewis, and at Twitter. And you can also find me on Speak Freely magazine, wespeakfreely.org.
Thank you so much. I look forward to our next conversation.
It's a pleasure, Bryan. Me too.
we are back. This is Moving Forward with Young Voices. Very happy to welcome Izabela Patriota to the program. And for those who are meeting you for the first time, Izabela, take just a moment here to give us a little bit of your background and talk about what you do.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me here, Bryan. My name is Izabela. I'm from Brazil, and I am a PhD in law. And I work for the Ladies of Liberty Alliance, an international network in over 40 countries around the world, spreading the ideas of liberty, targeting women. It's not that we hate men, it's just because we target women around the world.
Well, you're doing...
I might hate some, Bryan.
You're doing fantastic work. And actually, I'm looking at an article of yours published on Real Clear Public Affairs. I had forgotten that earlier this year, there was some very serious controversy between X, formerly Twitter, and a particular judge in Brazil. For those who aren't so familiar with the story, can you kind of give us a little bit of background on where that rift came from?
Yes, the rift began a couple of years ago, and it was in an operation that led to current president imprisonment in Brazil. One specific magazine that is free market oriented leaked a corruption scandal involving one of the ministers of the Supreme Court. And then this Supreme Court led the case to Moraes, this guy that we're going to be talking today. And ever since, he has been prosecuting people, saying bad things about the current ministers in the Supreme Court and also the president-elected Lula. So pretty much it started in 2019. And everybody who is spreading the wrong side of view about the current politics in Brazil, they can be arrested and they can just have their profiles banned. And it started in Twitter because mainly the audiences that we have in Twitter currently, they are against the current president in Brazil, and they were the ones vocal about these corruption scandals involving the Supreme Court members.
So as I recall, it was back in early September or late August, Twitter actually stopped being available in Brazil. Now, did that change? Do I remember seeing that was reconciled at some point and it's now available again, or is it still outlawed?
It is available now because Elon Musk paid $5 million USD in fines. So, like bureaucrats, they can use whatever excuse to fine you when they have the chance. So they just need a very open set of laws to incriminate whoever they want, whoever is against them. So it's precisely what happened in Brazil. The Supreme Court, because Twitter X didn't follow this and that, they removed the person that was representing X in Brazil for precautiously. They removed this person from Brazil because they were afraid that this person could go to jail, and this person would have if it hadn't happened. So they removed this person from Brazil, and the fines were stratospheric. So, and then Elon Musk paid this $5 million USD, and Twitter is back again. But it's important to mention that they only reopened X to operate in Brazil after the elections, because CNN leaked that the cabinet of the Moraes was waiting until past the election to have Twitter back on, because they knew that X is where all of the opponents to current president are pretty much talking about politics all the time. So they waited. So indeed, X was just back again in Brazil after the elections in Brazil. However, they lost the elections anyway. So it didn't work well for them.
Oh man, that sounds so authoritarian. So where does it stand now? This Justice Alexandre de Moraes, is he more than just a judicial figurehead? Does he have? I guess what I'm asking is, are other politicians within the country, do they look to him for permission to make moves? I'm just curious, how much hold or how much power does this man have?
This is a very interesting question, because even the New York Times recently posted an article saying, how much is there any other man around the world that has more power than this man currently in current democracies, in a democracy, which Brazil is still one. But the problem is that he is affiliated with the executive branch. So he is seen as somebody that's supportive of President Lula currently. And because, as I said, it began in 2019, related to the case of the corruption case that led to President Lula imprisonment. So that's why they're pretty much in the same boat. So things that they say and that he does are taken seriously by part of the population in Brazil because they support President Lula. So everybody that's standing up against it are leaving the country or they are facing prosecution. It was the case of journalists and a politician that even went to jail in Brazil because they were just pretty much exercising their freedom to say whatever they believe is going on in the country, not to incentivize violence or anything like that. So, for instance, now Brazil has a bill in the floor in the National Congress analyzing the regulation of social media in the country, and that they are using precisely what this did to X to make it a formal law to say if the platform doesn't follow all of these criteria, we can ban them. Like,
wow.
In the blink of an eye. So now we are in the battle of ideas in Brazil because we want to show people, and also because former President Bolsonaro doesn't have the best popularity right now in the country. So many people are going to follow whatever President Lula says. But we are in the battle of ideas here. It's not about a figure to me. It is about freedom of speech. So we're fighting this good fight.
And that brings me to this question. How free are people in Brazil to share their ideas? And we'll use, for instance, on social media, but X in particular. Do they have more freedom to do so than they had? Or is this creating an atmosphere of censorship where people really don't know what they're allowed to say?
Yes, I mean, for a Latin American perspective, Brazil is a free country. It's one of the freest countries in the world. I know that for an American, this doesn't mean a lot because we're talking about the freest country in the world, right? But for a Latin American perspective, Brazil is a democracy and it's free. What has just started in Brazil a couple of years ago is this atmosphere against people that are in favor of former President Bolsonaro because they're seen as extremists. So it has happened. Currently, some people are getting in trouble because what they say in Twitter and because they were involved in the very Brazilian January 6th that happened actually in January 8th of 2023 in Brazil. So everybody that was involved in our January 8th had very high fines and very high, it was very heavy what happened to them in the sense of it was very, very bad, but people are still free to say things. We're just battling here to avoid that the worst happen in Brazil, and Brazil ultimately can become what is Venezuela currently.
We've got about 30 seconds here, Izabela. Let's talk about the takeaway regarding free speech. I know people talk about, well, freedom of speech is my right, but you make a very strong case that it's not guaranteed unless you're willing to use it.
Yes, people just need to grow a thicker skin and be willing to listen to what they don't want to listen. This is how we guarantee a freedom of speech everywhere.
Hear, hear. A good friend of mine used to say that we only have the rights that we are willing to claim, use, and defend. And free speech should be one of the easier ones of those, but sometimes it can be tricky. Again, we're talking with Izabela Patriota. She is a Young Voices contributor. Izabela, where can people find you on social media?
Please, Ladies of Liberty in Instagram, Twitter, and X, and TikTok. And our website is ladiesofliberty.org.
Thank you so much. Welcome back. This is segment 3 of Moving Forward with Young Voices, and we're happy to welcome back to the program Charles Amos. Charles, you mentioned it's been about 4 years since we had you on the program, so go ahead and take a moment to refresh our listeners' minds about who you are and what you do.
Good evening. I am a Young Voices contributor on the Human Respect Fellowship, and in my work, I am a trainee accountant.
Very good. We have a topic to discuss here, and I'll admit this is probably one of the touchier subjects that we've covered on this program in some time, and that is assisted dying, prohibiting assisted dying rather, to be more specific. And I'm going to ask you, if you would please set the stage for us. Talk to me about what is going on right now in the UK regarding assisted dying, and then let's talk about your take on this, which is that prohibiting this practice of assisted dying is actually subjecting people to torture. What's the background on this look like?
Well, the Labour Party has allowed one of its members, Ken Leadbeater MP, to introduce a private member's bill to Parliament to allow for assisted dying. It's a very controversial topic within the United Kingdom. A lot of people are very worried that we're going to go down the same route as Canada, where a large number of their elderly people are killed. Some people would say against their will. And yes, I wrote an article about this for Conservative Home entitled "Prohibiting Assisted Dying is Torture." And my argument is this, if you'd like me to put it. Imagine you were in Japan and you were sitting on a bamboo stick, and due to medical conditions, you couldn't get off. And every time somebody tried to help you get off, some Japanese soldier kicked that person away and said, "No, you're not helping this person get off." And as a result of that, that bamboo stick ran up right the way through you until it killed you. And it's an incredibly painful process. I think we could all say that's torture because it's deliberately inflicting severe suffering on a person. So if we accept that that is torture, then for the same set of reasons, prohibiting assisted dying is torture too, because the state is inflicting severe suffering on people by the mechanism of stopping individuals consenting to other parties killing them on their behalf. It's a grotesque practice, this prohibition on assisted dying, and any liberal in their right mind ought to back the freedom of individuals to choose when they die in this world.
You know, the first question that comes to my mind, Charles, is there a difference between actively assisting someone in dying? In other words, whether it's administering a pharmaceutical cocktail that will, simply suppress their breathing and allow them to expire that way, and basically the person making the decision and issuing a directive saying, "I refuse food and water," and allowing nature to take its course. I mean, the end result is the same, but one of them is more active participation in forcing the issue. The other one is simply, allowing nature to play out.
Many Catholics believe in the doctrine of the double effect, which I believe St. Thomas Aquinas first came up with. And that's the idea that it's permissible to let people die, or at least it's less bad than to actively kill them. Now, in the vast majority of instances, I would agree with them, certainly when it comes to discussing war and whether or not to target innocents, for example. But on this issue, I don't think the doctrine of the double effect applies, because we're talking about people consenting to their own death. I mean, if we're going to accept that people can smoke and on average knock 10 years off their own life, and that's fine, that's permissible, I don't see why we can't, for the same set of reasons, allow people to knock, say, a year off their life, that year being incredibly awful as well. So I really don't think the Catholics have any case against the liberal position that people should be able to do as they please with their own person. It is theirs, after all.
No, this, you were right when you said this can be a very tricky issue, because on the one hand, I agree. I don't want the state dictating, that life is so precious, we're going to hook you up to machines and force you to stay alive, even though you're in agony and even though it's prolonging your suffering unnecessarily, and no one, may interfere. At the same time, I have that worry. I'm not Catholic, but I guess I share the concern that they have, that if we were to grant even a small degree but at this point life just isn't worth living, then it seems like that could start us down a path where we find other exceptions, if that makes any sense.
I don't think it does, because the reason we're saying it's permissible for somebody to kill somebody else is not because we're saying their life is not worth living. We're saying it's permissible for that other person to kill them because that person has consented to it. So we may well find, and this would be most unfortunate, but it probably will be the case in some instances, that people do have a worthwhile life, yet they still will choose to end it anyway because they don't see either it being worthwhile in the future or they simply wish to. Anyway, I will say this, though. The defense that I make for assisted dying is very much a radical one. The parliamentary bill that's being proposed does come with a number of safeguards, inverted commas, such as you are only allowed to undergo assisted dying if you are within 6 months of death and you get the approval of 2 doctors and a judge to ensure that your choice is not involuntary, an issue that I also address in my article.
You know, I have a couple of friends who have been hospice nurses, and this is a topic we've actually discussed. And one of the things that one of them had pointed out was, he said, you know, the dying, particularly those who have a terminal illness and who are suffering through, you know, that, and it can be a horribly long grind. What they really want when they assert, look, it's my life and therefore I get to make that decision, is they just want to assert that degree of control. And this friend in particular told me about a patient of his who had a bottle of, I assume they were painkillers. Basically, they were strong enough that if he took 4 or more of them, they would be enough to cause him to die. And he kept that bottle of prescription pills with him, tied in a sock. And every day when my friend would go to tend to this patient, he would ask him, "How are you doing today, Bill?" And Bill would hold up the sock and he'd say, "I'm hanging in there." And what he was communicating was, I can do this if I want to, but for whatever reason, he was determined to see it through. And he did ultimately end up dying, you know, through the natural consequences of the illness rather than hastening his death, you know, through taking the prescription painkillers. And that's always kind of struck me as, you know, the issue that you bring up here. It's about, does the person have control over their life? I would say absolutely. At the same time, I don't want to diminish the value of life. And sometimes I worry that measures that offer assistance in some way chip away at that foundation.
I think it should be noted that in the vast majority of countries, there is no prohibition on suicide. So if we're going to allow people to take their own lives, I don't see why we shouldn't allow people to take the lives of others if those others consent. Life is worth living because of the good that it has within it. It is not in itself something that is worthwhile. If you're living in the most immense pain, I think we can all agree that that life should be ended because it's not worthwhile. And given this is the instance that a number of people will be in, I think we have to allow them the freedom to consent to others putting them down, however unfortunate that may be.
Yeah, I'm curious. How do public polls indicate people feel about this? I assume this would be a somewhat divisive issue.
The campaign for assisted dying in this country has found that the majority of the British public back it, I think in excess of 66%. And interestingly enough, the age group that most backs the measure is the elderly, and the most elderly in particular. You would have thought it would be the other way around, but it's not. So it's not as controversial as it would appear to outsiders in America. In Parliament, it is very divisive. I suspect it's more on a knife edge, but the majority of the British public are in favour of allowing people the freedom to allow others to put them down. Very
interesting. Well, like we were saying earlier, there's nuance to this. I appreciate you bringing your point of view to this, and you make some very compelling points. For those who want to follow you or otherwise follow your work, where is the best place for them to find you?
The best place for them to find me is themusingindividualist.substack.com.
Again, we're talking with Charles Amos. And Charles, great to visit with you. I look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you, Bryan. Thank you very much.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. This is our fourth and final segment today, and we are happy to welcome Daniel Corcoran to the program. Daniel, in addition to being a Young Voices contributor, I'm positive you wear a few more hats. Take a moment here and tell us just a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Bryan, for having me on today. So professionally, I work at Amazon as a program manager, but that's completely divorced from, I would say, some of my personal passions, such as politics. I co-hosted, or actually just hosted, a political podcast, Overcoming the Divide, which really sought to mend political fractures through, civil discourse and debate, and inviting on a whole bunch of diverse political opinions. And then also, more recently, I participated in a roundtable discussion focused on the contemporary landscape for boys and men, where I co-hosted that with a few other guys that I'm close with, and I would say are individual leaders in their own right. Both, four young mid-20s men, just really kind of giving their thoughts on the contemporary landscape of what it is to be to be a man today. So we did that, and that was released over the summer. And then just most recently did Young Voices contributor program, which was an absolute delight. And yeah, got a few articles out, one of which I know we're going to discuss today. Yeah,
I'm looking at your article published back on October 11th on the Daily Wire about how male voters became the central focus of the 2024 election. That's, by the way, that was a pretty solid observation.
Dude.
I mean, we have a couple weeks hindsight now. Let's talk about how that shook out, because it sounds like it was the young men who stepped up and delivered in this election 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, well, for people who are not happy with the results, he's most certainly being blamed. So, yeah, I mean, I would say that I feel validated in that prediction, and for someone who feels a bit closer to the issue, I kind of saw this coming from a while back. I spoke with different boys and men's advocates over a year ago, and we would just discuss how these, degrading terms such as toxic masculinity, mansplaining, I won't curse, but small d energy, all these things kind of really degrade a population, a large demographic, and obviously it's going to cause some resentment and some hostile feelings towards the people it's coming from. And the people it's coming from were particularly people on the left. Not to say that the right is perfect on how they handle this issue, but the left was the one doing a lot of the denigration. And therefore, I think this was a direct response to that. This is a big middle finger, screw you, to the people who were, offering those harsh criticisms and insults for the better part of 8 years.
So I guess the golden question now is anything going to calm down? It seems like it's been kind of mellow for the last couple of weeks. I was expecting a lot more outcry and maybe even some violence, rioting and the sort that we saw in 2016, and that really hasn't happened.
Well, this is interesting, Bryan, because I've actually heard that the reason why there's not these massive protests is particularly from, say, the left, who would be protesting this issue, is they're up in arms about what's happening over in Gaza and Lebanon and the West Bank right now, and how that obviously involves the United States. And look at it as if you look at it as a political affiliation, if you think of that as a body, well, the part of the body who's typically going to be the most activist and go out there and protest, well, they're upset with the brain saying hey, we're supporting this war, this genocide, they will label it as. Therefore, we're not going to go out and protest for the candidate that beat you, because we're not even aligned with you on this major issue that we find to be this massive moral dilemma for us. Or not dilemma, really, just it's quite easy in their eyes, but that the party isn't facing and that isn't providing them the policy resolution that they ought to seek.
So let's kind of break down in terms of men and their influence on this election. I mentioned young men voters in particular, but did we also see that carried through to older demographics of men as well?
Well, men overall went towards Trump, and Trump outright won the male Latino vote. So that's obviously significant. And I would say that Trump was leading among these demographics going into the election, specifically in these key swing states such as Michigan, such as Wisconsin, such as Pennsylvania. But the concern was their turnout. And historically, the male turnout has been lower compared to female registered women turn out. Therefore, that was like the concern. Are males going to turn out? Like these especially young men, these low propensity voters, as they would call them. And that's part of the strategy of Trump going on these different podcasts, whether it's Rogan or Lex Freeman or Theo Von, which we know that his son, who's like, I believe in his 40s, Don Jr., had a large, and Barron also, both of them had a large part in pushing the father, Donald Trump, in that direction of, reaching out to these young male voters.
So as far as, you'd mentioned the whole toxic masculinity. We've heard that term a lot. I think especially in the last 4 years, that's kind of been, code word for, if you're a guy, shut up. You don't, stop mansplaining and go be quiet because you've had your time. There's new ownership or new management here. Are we likely to see a toning down of some of that harsh, men are to blame for the problems of the world rhetoric, or are the people who are pushing that likely to double down and continue to push that?
I think the Democratic Party has to now reconcile with that they're no longer the party of the working class, which is largely made up of working male voters. And due to that, they are going to maybe want to put a siphon off some of that rhetoric, especially on the more fringe ends of it, especially like such, I would say, hostile terms of toxic masculinity. And you have people on the left, such as Scott Galloway, who's a renowned economist and professor out of NYU, saying this is not the way to reach out to men. This is not going to help us. And as we have seen, this has hurt us before in this election and previously, and it's pushing men in the other direction. So I think anyone who is worth their salt and actually understands the layout will say, like the political landscape, will say we shouldn't lean more into this rhetoric. And it's pretty obvious. Like why would someone vote for you after you've been slapping them in the face for the past 8 years, calling them all these negative terms? There was this one, I'll call out this one, the Boys and Men's Advocate, George Timmerman highlighted that during the DNC's like national like party like speech, they highlighted, or platform, they highlighted women and girls 76 times, used that term, and they highlighted the words boys and men 4 times.
Wow.
That just shows the disparity. Yeah. And I think moving forward, there's going to be more of a focus to bring back in that male voter.
Daniel, which
is good.
It also seems like we're turning the corner, or at least it feels like we may be turning a corner on this issue of biologically born males competing in women's sports. I don't know if that's something that is on your radar screen, but I'd love to get your take on some of the more recent developments there.
Yeah, I think the American people, the polling numbers are not, or the data isn't immediately come to mind, but confidently can say the American people feel uncomfortable with biological men and boys participating in girls and women's sports and feel that's unfair. It's not to say that the public feels that, we shouldn't accept people who are, going through any gender dysmorphia or who are transgender, but it's like when it comes to these certain domains, we're not gonna be so, oh yeah, like nonchalant, laissez-faire. Like, no, we want some rules in place and we want some boundaries. So I do think that's kind of like where the consensus currently lies.
One thing to keep an eye on, if that's an issue that is on your radar screen, would be San Jose State University, which has a male player who dresses and behaves as if he's a woman, but schools have been choosing to forfeit their volleyball games rather than play that team. And now it looks like there's actually a lawsuit being filed against the Mountain West Conference and the NCAA and so forth. So I don't know, maybe one of those to keep an eye on, but hopefully something that gets resolved.
It's interesting to say the least, yeah.
All right, again, we're talking with Daniel Corcoran. He is a contributor to Young Voices. And Daniel, you also are the host of a podcast?
Overcome the Divide, yes. I recently put an end to the podcast just to focus on other outside endeavors, but yeah, that podcast is still up and running in regard to all the episodes available. Had a great one with Glenn Greenwald on free speech on university campuses, which I would highly recommend anyone check out who's interested in that.
Where can people find you on social media?
Dan Corcoran 28, and also my LinkedIn, always like to offer, which is Daniel Corcoran. So both of those places, you can connect with me and reach out about any questions or just want to chat.